I want to announce to you who's on the cover of the April edition of our magazine. It's called Science of Mind magazine, if you don't know that. And you probably already are getting a sense who's on there. Don Miguel Ruiz, a dear friend to this movement, and certainly a good teacher to many of us who have studied his work. If you don't know this man, back in 1997, he published a book called The Four Agreements. And that's a book that has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into 38 languages. So apparently there's something to that. If you don't remember it, that's what the little book looks like. And it really is that. He's got 4 things that he's asking you to agree to. And this comes from the teachings of the Toltec people of southern Mexico. And the Toltecs are the wisdom keepers of southern Mexico, much like the Lakota are said to be the wisdom keepers of the native people of North America. And they have some very interesting things that they espouse. The primary one that they always begin with is that God is all there is. You ever heard that before? And that's an ancient teaching through them, that they teach us that God is everywhere. Ruiz also says that everyone that you meet is a reflection of you. Again, something that we teach right here. So when somebody tells me that, or somebody goes somewhere else to some other teaching or discipline or receives something, the way that is often expressed to me is, they're teaching the science of mind. And my answer to that is always, truth is truth is truth. And it doesn't matter where it comes from. If it's real and it works, then it's truth. And that's what we teach. But not everybody in the world calls it science of mind. Nonetheless, it's ours to pay attention to and to use. So this idea of the teachings of Don Miguel and the 4 agreements starts with that one agreement, or that one that we first showed you. These are the 4 of them in the book. The first one is be impeccable with your word. That's what we're talking about today. The second one is don't take anything personally. Then don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Always very simple. At the same time, could take a lot of energy to change someone's way of being in the world on some of these. And Ruiz says that the first one, be impeccable with your word, is the simplest and the most challenging to actually adopt into your life. We'll see. But with those 4, we're going to look at this idea of being impeccable, which comes from the Latin meaning without sin. Which you can see in other words like impersonal, improvement. There's all kinds of words that start with I am, and that means without. And then peccatus means sin. Now, what is sin? Let's not get into the idea that we're teaching people about sin here. The word sin is actually an old archer's term, meaning you've missed the mark. So that's the best I can do with sin. But most people, hear that word sin and think that you've done something bad or wrong, which is sin. That's not the way we look at it. So I'm going to kind of move us away from that idea into a different way of looking at Ruiz's teaching. And that is, be impeccable not with your word, but with your life. Now, I know the word we just looked at was impeccable, but I've changed the word from word to life. Word is powerful, but I think that impeccability actually has a larger spectrum of relevance in our lives. The way that I learned from my native teacher to be impeccable was when your thought and your word and your action are completely in alignment. And if you can do that, then you're living an impeccable life. Now, is that tough? You betcha. Because there's lots of thoughts that run through our mind that we are not going to want to say out loud. Now, and I'm not suggesting here that we have to reveal and be transparent about everything in our lives. We're allowed to have private lives. We're allowed to have things that we don't go around talking about. That's absolutely true. What this applies to are the thoughts that come into our mind when we're relating to other people or situations. When sometimes those judgments come or those limiting thoughts of any sort, especially about ourselves, when those thoughts come, and then we say something different, we're not being impeccable. We're not working from that place that makes our life work. So the idea here is that not to necessarily change what we're saying out loud, but think about what we're saying out loud and see if we can make that real to us on the inside. If we can make it real to us on the inside, I mean, how often does some thought that really isn't the kind of thing you want to say out loud that runs through your mind, and then you say some nicety to kind of cover it up, but really there's more truth in the nicety than there is in what's going through your head. I have found this in my life many times. And what I do with that is listen to your word, John, and see if you can't make that word real in your mind. Rather than trying, I'm not suggesting that you go out and every judgmental thought comes across your mind, you say it out loud. That's backwards. The way to do it is to recognize that the way you would be respectful, the way you would be generous, the way you would be gracious with your words, see if you can't do that in your mind and get a different result. And from that place, you can live a life that is impeccable. Now, like I said, there's three things. There's our thoughts, there's our words, and there are our actions. And when they're not lined up, we end up getting ourselves into a fix. And we're the ones that have to deal with it more than anybody else. One thing I want to caution you on, don't ever challenge another person on being impeccable because you don't know what their thoughts are. I mean, you can compare their words and their actions, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but truly, the idea is that don't judge somebody and say that they are or are not impeccable, because that's their work. That's my work for me. It's your work for you. So let's look at these ideas. So what happens when our thoughts don't match our words? When we think something and then we say something different, how does that fold out into our lives? Well, we know we're being dishonest even though nobody else does. And who does it really matter other than us? Oh, I remember Rocking Bear talking about the idea of doing something. He was down in Mexico, and he was married, and he was down in Mexico without his wife. And there was this fella who claimed to be a shaman that said, "We have some lovely young ladies here that you could that could entertain you for the evening." And he said, "No, I wouldn't be interested in doing that." And I said, "Why not? Who's going to know?" And he said, "I am." Which I thought was brilliant, because we're the one that matters. Above all else, we're the one that matters. We create internal conflict and confusion. We certainly can, because we're saying one thing and thinking something else. That means we have to keep track of all that. That can get really difficult and lead us to a place where it distorts our relationships, where we're not really sure what we said to who and how we're supposed to relate over here or over there, because they're different, because we're playing this game in our mind and we're not living it in a way that works for everybody. And the idea that our sense of ourself is diminished by this, because we become self-judgmental, thinking about those thoughts in our heads and how they're really not very attractive. And we get on ourselves, which is never a good way to go. We should live a life where we don't have to be judging ourselves for anything that we say or that we think. And the only way to fix that is to align those two things, what we think and what we say. And the best way to do that is to work at the place of thought, so that those nice things that come out of our mouth are in alignment with that. I had a friend when I was 12 years old who convinced me it'd be a great idea to go up to the neighborhood grocery store. It was a Grand Union, and steal some candy, because we both liked candy. And I didn't think that was such a good idea right off, but I obviously was easily influenced. So I went with him, and we went into the store, and we put a bunch of candy in our pockets, and we ran out of the store to get on our bikes, and we got to meet the store manager, who brought us into his office and called our parents. So we obviously were released then to come home to a new kind of hell, at least on my part. My mother was not happy. It was summertime, and she told me I had to stay in my room for a month. I felt like such a victim. It wasn't even my idea. And I had to spend a month in my bedroom. And what I would do is I would sit and stare out the window. And I could see my friend playing with other kids, doing other things. And I thought, such a victim I am to all this. And that went on for the rest of my childhood, thinking that was one of the most terrible things that ever happened to me. And at some point, I went back to Florida after I had moved away, and I was married and living in Texas. And I came back to Florida and was visiting with my mom. And I was out in the front yard one day. And this fella that had been my cohort all those years ago was walking down the sidewalk. And I said hello, and we had this conversation. And I brought this up to him. This is like, I don't know, we were definitely in our mid-20s by then. And I said, you know how unfair that was that happened? He laughed. I said, why would you laugh at that? He said, well, you had to spend a month in your bedroom. And I lived with a stepfather that reminded me of that almost every day of my life. Who would bring me out when we'd have guests to come to the house and say, this is my thieving stepson. I had none of that. And so much so that at that point in my life, I had actually developed a business in Texas and was rather successful. And he hadn't done much with his life, that he had just decided to live down to the level of that disgrace in his life and hadn't done much with it. So sometimes we think we've got it so bad and things are so tough, and maybe not. Maybe we're on our perfect path of learning, and we're learning the way we're supposed to. Align your words and your thoughts, and you'll be able to work through a lot of that in your life. So what happens when our thoughts don't match our actions? Well, the same kind of stuff happens. We become exhausted because we're trying to act against what we believe. We're trying to act in a way that is appropriate when we have thoughts that don't match that. That's hard work. That takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. We waste considerable energy trying to hide our thoughts and our feelings while that's going on. That term, I had to bite my tongue till it bled, kind of can fall into this kind of a category. And then we tend to be miserable and unhappy because of that, because our life is a conflict. It's not balanced. It's not working together. So thoughts and actions, when they align, avoid a lot of this. The last one of these three would be what happens when our words don't match our actions. Well, this one's different. This one's different because people observe our words and they observe our actions. And when they don't line up, they see us as lying, which is never pleasant to know that people are seeing you as less than. Probably you're joining them in this, though. And of course, we're not to be trusted if we do that. And we're often ostracized and left out of things because people can't trust us and don't see us as someone they want to befriend. So this one's probably the toughest part of it, but they're all three important. They're all three part of the mix that makes this work. So now what happens when our thoughts and our words and our actions do align? When they are the same, then how is life? We never have to remember what we told anybody because we're going to tell everybody the same thing. There's no games going on. It's simply what we believe. Rocking Bear would say if somebody said something that he did not align with, he would simply say, well, that's not true for me. He wouldn't make them wrong. He wouldn't say they're bad, or wouldn't say what they were doing or thinking was bad. He would just say that didn't work for him, which gave him the opportunity to teach at times. And at other times, they didn't want to hear it, so it didn't matter. We simply get to be who we are when we are impeccable with our words, our thoughts, and our actions. We get to live the life that we want to live without any boundaries or limitations or restrictions because we're being who we are. How lovely is that? And life is easier. Oh, thank God, let life be easier. Because there's nothing to watch, to be careful about. This just is who I am. Now, again, Ruiz said doing this kind of work is the hardest work to do. But it certainly has a payoff. It certainly has for all of us the ability to be gracious, to be generous, and to give ourselves to the world in a way that makes a difference. And we do make a difference. Every one of us makes a difference. So be impeccable with your life, with what you think, with what you say, and what you do. That doesn't mean you have to be transparent about everything. It just means that what comes out has to match what's on the inside. And when it does, people will respect you. They will admire you. They will appreciate you. And your life will be much, much easier. So take that from the Toltec wisdom and know that it can help in many, many ways. And with that, I want you to know that I love you. And I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you.